Welcome, Doc, to my podcast. This is really excited to have an expert such as yourself on my show, host of the John Freakin Muir podcast with over 200 episodes. It is the definitive place for all things John Muir Trail and now outdoor and adventure as a whole. Doc, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Now, did you put the word expert in air quotes? Did I see that with your fingers? You did some air quotes when you said expert.
I just talk with my hands. I think you might be selling yourself short there. I don't know that there's any better place to get information right now online.
Wow, thank you very much. That's a huge compliment, and I really appreciate that. I just like talking to people about outdoor adventures and through hiking, and I hope that people are enjoying it.
Well, I definitely am. Now, I always give guests an opportunity to make sure to introduce themselves and make sure I've covered everything. Is there something that I missed there that you'd like to expand your intro to?
No, I think you did a pretty good job. I'm just a guy with a podcast who likes talking to people from all over the world. I feel like one of the fringe benefits, I'm not going to get rich doing this, but one of the fringe benefits is being able to talk to people from all walks of life, from all corners of the globe, who are interested in the same thing, and that's pretty powerful.
Well, we definitely share that in common. Now let's rewind the clock here and maybe start all the way at the beginning. I watched some of your early episodes, which it seems like have really generated, and as the podcast is named, John Freakin Muir from the JMT Trail. Would you tell my listeners just what the John Muir Trail, the JMT, is, and perhaps your motivation for doing it?
Absolutely. The John Muir Trail is a hiking path in the Sierras in California. It's a short little path of 211 miles, and it runs north-south. You can start in Happy Isles, which is in Yosemite National Park, and head south, and it'll end up at the top of Mount Whitney, the highest mountain in the lower 48 at 14,505 feet. And so it goes through all kinds of mountainous terrain, unbelievable beauty, remote wilderness. It really feels like you are all out there by yourself, far, far away from everybody else. And it's just an incredible sight and an incredible hike. And, it really, the impetus for hiking the JMT kind of came out of nowhere. I had really no experience with long distance backpacking or hiking. I grew up doing some car camping and doing some day hikes in my community, and I had a buddy that I worked with that we did the Los Angeles Marathon, and thought, okay, what do we do now? What's next? We were kind of, we're in our 40s and looking for a way to postpone the cruel hands of time, and thought, let's he had hiked up to the top of Whitney. He had done a day hike from Whitney Portal up to Mount Whitney, and he came up with the idea of let's do the JMT. And so I had no idea what that was all about. Didn't know that there was such a thing as, through hikers or backpackers who were doing this for multiple days on end. And so we did some investigation. We booked a trip, and lo and behold, had a fantastic time.
Now, that is, in both cases, your buddy's case, jumping from the Whitney hike, which is a really challenging hike. I always put it in comparison. I always say it's comparable, perhaps, to running a marathon, or about on the same token. But going from that, or in your case, going from car camping to the JMT, is a huge step up. Did you do much in preparation to get ready for this?
Yeah, we did a lot of hikes leading up to this, a lot of day hikes. We started acquiring gear and started wearing our gear on the hikes. We didn't have a fully loaded bear canister or anything, but we kept adding things to the pack to make it, to simulate the weight we would be carrying out there. And we did do one overnight experience at the KOA in Acton, Agua Dulce, which the PCT goes through. And we hiked I think it was a 10 or 12 mile stretch of the PCT after spending the night, throwing up the tents and trying out the cooking gear, the stoves, all of that. And getting up in the morning, packing it all up, and hiking 12 miles where we got picked up by one of our spouses. So that's pretty much the prep. I mean, we kept telling ourselves, hey, as we're getting closer and closer to the date where we were gonna do this, kept telling ourselves, hey, all it is walking. We're just gonna be walking. We have all day. We have all day to walk. So it can't be that bad, right? So we kind of tried to talk ourselves up that way. And there were some days where we were on the trail and it was like, holy cow, what are we doing out here? So.
Well, we're kindred spirits in that regard. I've never done a through hike of that magnitude, or we could talk about maybe section hiking, but I did bike pack the CT, and my buddy and I, we just didn't have the time to prep for it in a responsible way, shall we say. And so he said to me, hey, we'll just ride into shape on the trail. That was our policy, our sort of strategy, if you will. So I think there's a lot of that goes on some of these hikes.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm excited to, after being, an avid listener, to turn the tables a little bit. And so I know that you do multiple segments that I want to make sure I get in at the beginning and that it will come back at the end of the podcast. So one is, taken from directly from your podcast, the pro tip insight of the week. So I want to make sure that we get a little doc wisdom. So as we're going through this podcast, just make sure I'll hit you with that. But I'm sure you've got plenty of wisdom to share on that regard.
Wisdom comes from experience, and experience comes from mistakes. So I've made a lot of mistakes, lots of wisdom for you.
Okay. They say life is the most brutalist of teachers, right? Something akin to that.
That's right.
And then now you also do a must-bring gear review. Not to jump too much into the gear review in the beginning, but I'm just so excited to do it. So now, as in the words of Doc, if you were to let a stranger pack your backpack, what piece of gear would you absolutely require them to put in? And if you've got a brand, all the better.
Now, Eric, if we're going to do this, we've got to do it right.
Oh.
Did you hear that? Did that come through?
Oh, I didn't come through.
Oh, no. Okay.
Oh, no.
Right.
Oh,
yeah,
no.
It was my little intro from my daughter, the must bring gear review. So,
yeah. Hopefully it'll come through in post on the audit.
Yeah,
Fingers
we'll
crossed.
See. We'll see. Okay. But if I were going to let a stranger pack my bag, I would insist that they put in my quilt.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. Enlightened Equipment quilt. It is fantastic. If they were to put a sleeping bag in there, a mummy bag, I'd be disappointed because I am a side sleeper. I like to stretch out. I move around during the night, and mummy bag it's really constricting at times. And so having a quilt does the job to keep me warm, but also allows me to move around quite a bit.
So this was interesting. I actually thought you were going to say tarp, and I definitely want to bring up the topics of tarp in a minute here. But in terms of quilt, I've got a confession that in all my years of hiking, I've never used one. And maybe it's that I don't feel as constricted sleeping in a mummy bag. Is that the main advantage? Just the freedom?
The freedom, and it's lighter. Typically, quilts are lighter than a sleeping bag. So the lightness that always helps with the load, and then for me, just being able to side sleep and move around quite a bit is very helpful too.
Interesting. And being an outsider to quilts, my concern, and maybe this is that I tend to thrash around a little bit sleeping. I would think that it would be a chillier night, but people swear to me that that's not the case.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got the right sleeping pad, an inflatable sleeping pad, and you have the right quilt that has a foot box in it, you tuck yourself in and you're just fine.
Now, do you specify a specific temperature rating for the quilt for something like the JMT, or do you just kind of dial it in by wearing extra layers of clothes?
Yeah, it depends on what time of the year you're going, how early or late in the summer is going to depend, have an impact on what the temperatures might be overnight. And so the comfort rating, the padding, the way you can tweak it is to wear some extra layers of clothing. But I have a 15 degree quilt. And it's funny because I don't care if you're carrying a sleeping bag or if you're carrying a quilt, whatever the rating says it is, it's probably about 10 degrees warmer. I mean, less than that. So if you have a 15-degree bag, you're going to survive at 15, but you're not, my experience is that, once you go below 25, then you're really starting to feel it.
Right. The degree rating is often a suggestion.
That's right.
On their survival rating, if you will.
Not. Yeah, you will not die if it gets to this temperature. Is the rating.
And it sounds like, by the decision of the quilt, you're in the camp that truly values sleep overnight and kind of advocates for the importance of that on these extended hikes.
Now, you say sleep overnight, I mean, as opposed to, what's the other option?
Well, good point. I guess I'm coming off a few podcasts with adventure racers or of that sort, and it just seems like they don't sleep. So,
I do advocate sleeping. Yes, you have
Sure.
you have to get your sleep and your rest to prepare for the next day. And sometimes after a day of hiking and being out in the middle of nowhere, it's tough to get to sleep. I always have problems the first couple of nights falling asleep, just because I'm hyper aware and excited, and it just doesn't come to me very easily.
Well, and then too, I've noticed, kind of staying on that sleeping topic, the pad, you've advocated against perhaps a lot of the pads. I refer to the design in the modern world as crinkly, but I think I've heard potato chip versions. Okay.
Yes, those drive me crazy. That would keep me up as well as whoever's in camp with me. In fact, I had a guy that brought one of those on a trip or two with us, and I would wait until he set up his tent, and then I would go as far away on the other side of the camp because I could not spend the night 10 feet away from him with him just tossing and turning and all that crinkling going on.
This is a transition that I have seen kind of in my backpacking arc, if you will. When I started, the real cool thing was the Thermarest foam insulating pad that is silent, and I also think is probably the most comfortable. Now, it's hard to pack, so the air pads have, I don't know, in my estimation, have kind of taken over. I'd love to get your thoughts on it, but there's been a shift as well towards the air pads tend to be a little bit colder, and so to overcome that, they have to put like a Mylar insert that makes them just annoyingly loud. I've never seen a way to get around that other than not to use it.
Yeah, you're talking about the Thermarest accordion type foam pads.
Yep.
I've camped with those, and those have done a great job. They're not always the most comfortable, depending on what thickness you get on that pad. I have a Climate right now. I think it's pronounced Climate. It's Klymit, Climate, and it's an inflatable. And I've had it for years, no problems with it. It's not crinkly. I'm not sure what the Z rating is on that. I mean, people can really do a deep dive on all kinds of things, statistics and details on hiking gear. The Z rating tells you how cold you're going to be or how warm it's going to keep you. I'm not sure what the Z rating is on the Climate, but it works just fine. It doesn't make a lot of noise. It keeps me off the ground, and I've survived. So that's good enough.
Can't complain there.
Right.
Now, I've noticed, and this is where I thought you were going to go with the must bring gear review, is staying on the sleep system, but I thought you were going to go with the tarp. Are you still big on the tarp as a means?
Yeah, let's talk about that because I think one of the things we were going to talk about, I put some notes down here, is how have I changed gear wise or planning wise. And so I think the first time you go out, you decide to do this, you're acquiring gear. A lot of people, myself included, show up at REI. REI is a great place to pick up gear, and sometimes you're maybe you haven't done your research, maybe you don't know enough about what to look for. You're looking for a tent, you're looking for a backpack, you're looking for a sleeping bag. You pick those up, and then you get out on the trail and you realize, holy cow, my pack is 40 pounds, and I've got to add food and water to it, right? And so that's just brutal. especially if it's a warm day in Yosemite and you're climbing. So, in hindsight, you say, okay, next hike, I need to lighten up. I need to get some lighter gear, which is more expensive, right? If you're going to get quality light gear, it's going to cost more money. So you kind of space it out. You got a birthday, you got Christmas, you're trying to make things work on a budget and pick up some good gear for camping. And then you get really excited and you say, you know what, I can go even lighter. I can go even lighter than this. And so you start to cut corners. You become one of those people that breaks your toothbrush in half, or you don't bring a toothbrush, you just bring your finger in some kind of toothpaste and you use your finger, or you bring a tarp. And I dove down the tarp rabbit hole for quite a few trips. And then I realized that in the quest to go as light as possible, you give up comfort items. You sacrifice comfort. So you are light as heck out there and you're having fun while you're walking, but you get to camp and all of a sudden it's not fun. I took a bivvy on a trip a couple of years ago on the JMT, the southern half of the JMT, and it began raining in the afternoon. We made camp and it began raining. All of my buddies, they jump into their tents, they're fine, sitting up, they're reading, doing whatever, waiting for the rain to pass. I have to climb into this bivvy. I'm laying on the ground in like a mummy bag, like in a sarcophagus, and it just wasn't fun. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to carry a few extra pounds to ensure some comfort, that I'm having a good time when I'm in camp as well. So I did do a tarp for quite a few summers, and then I went back just this past couple of summers to a tent.
Oh, that's really interesting that you've kind of walked it back a little bit, or explored kind of all the options. The interesting thing there is that I thought, and maybe I'm a few podcasts behind. I thought you were going to be at one point you were kind of a tarp evangelist, if you will. But to catch everybody up here, I guess I would break it down as 4 types of sleep, tent and cowboy camping being perhaps the 2 most extreme. Tent is just what it sounds like. You got the full tent to sleep in. Cowboy camping out under the stars, which is an amazing night. And then you've got these 2 in-betweens, if you will, tarp and bivvy. Bivvy being a hopefully waterproof shell that covers your mummy sleeping bag. And it's interesting to hear your story of being in a bivvy with all of your friends, enjoying, reading a book in a tent. I've got a similar story myself. Same thing. There I was in a hailstorm in Colorado in a bivvy, riding it out in a bivvy that was questionably waterproof, and that will kind of put a stop to that real quick. And you think, man, if I had only brought my tent, I could be enjoying everything in the in dry, warm comfort, if you will.
That's exactly it. And not only is the bivvy waterproof, but it's also airproof. And so I had a near-death experience on the John Muir Trail. I am cocooned in the bivvy on the first night, and I've got it's raining, and I've got it zipped up tight. I don't want any water getting in. And middle of the night, I start feeling like short of breath. I'm like, what is going on? I got the flashlight out. I'm looking around. I unzip it a little bit, and there I see a little tag on the inside of the bivvy. It says, "Do not zip completely shut, or you may suffocate." I'm like, oh, okay. That might have been good in like big writing somewhere on the packaging.
Good initial information.
Right.
Now, putting this in conversation with your original JMT hike. Now, you did not do the whole thing on the first go. Is that correct?
Yeah. In fact, this is a big plug for section hiking, because I've never done the whole thing in one go. I didn't have the time to take off of work, or to take away from the family. And so the most time I'm able to get away from the family and from work, possibly 10 days, even that's a stretch. And so we've done it in sections. I've done the southern half 3 times, which goes from like Muir Trail Ranch down to Whitney, which is about 125 miles, which, for me, that's awesome. Had a great time. You're out in the middle of nowhere. You feel accomplished after hiking 125 miles. I think if you were to survey the population, less than 1% of the population in the world has done a 125-mile hike. So I say, okay, that's good enough. Now, I've hiked every foot of the John Muir Trail, but in sections. So I've done the whole thing. I've done it in different sections, different summers, and it's been great.
I really like, and that's one of the things that why I was really happy to have you on, is that I find on my podcast what you tend to have are the perhaps most extreme people who are doing not only the JMT but sometimes the PCT or the Triple Crown, and these monster hikes, thousands of miles of hiking stacked up. And for the average listener, that's just not feasible. And it sounds like you and I are in the same camp of it's relatively hard to get that time off. The JMT, I guess I would put it a 3-week trip if you're hiking at a
Right.
reasonable pace.
Uh-huh.
Right. And so there's this sort of other way to do it in sections. Now, were you aiming from the start to do it in 2 sections, or were you thinking you were going to split it up even more?
Yeah, that was the original idea. We'd do the southern half, the first summer, and then the next summer we'd do the northern half. And then the northern half, things happened, and we ran into some really inclement weather, and didn't look like the weather was going to be changing much over the next 3 or 4 days. And we had to make a decision of, do we want to do this just for doing it and be miserable doing it, or do we want to bail out and have discretion be the better part of valor this time, and live to tell another day. So, I know all the hardcore hikers out there now listening, the PCTers, the Triple Crowners are going, oh, this guy, what a wuss. But, we made that decision not to suffer for 3 or 4 days and not know when or where we were going to end up. So it turned into a couple of more trips to do the northern half. We picked it up where we left off. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Well, I totally hear you on the 1 or 2% that have done it all, but the 98% are impressed that you've completed it at all. So you're in good company. It's actually a dream of mine to one day complete the whole trail. Growing up in that region, I've never actually strung it all together or even completed it section wise. So my experience is even more spotted than you, if you will.
Now, Eric, I mean, we could section hike the PCT. We just do 100 miles every summer. We could be done in 26 years, 26 and a half.
Right. If only.
Yeah.
It's a different breed of person who does that, or yeah, absolutely. So now, are you thinking that you would like to move on to other objectives now that you've done the JMT? It sounds like the southern section you mentioned about 3 times. Are you hoping to stay in the Sierras or branch out a little bit?
I love the Sierras. Great time on the JMT. That southern section, I think, is the better half of the section. I love the altitude. I love being above the tree line, kind of the desolate granite landscapes, and the high alpine lakes are just unforgettable. And so if I had another chance to do the southern half of the JMT, I would do it in a heartbeat. We did the High Sierra Trail last year, which is a bit shorter. It's about 70 miles and it goes east-west. I've done the Mineral King Loop in Sequoia a couple of times, which is like a 38-mile loop, and it has 2 huge passes, Black Rock Pass and Sawtooth Pass, and very challenging at times. I mean, I've never felt worse on a trail than I have at certain portions of Mineral King. So it's pretty tough. And I've done the Trans-Catalina Trail 3 times. So that's a trail on Catalina Island. It's also about 38 miles from tip to tip, which is a lot of fun. And you got all kinds. It's almost like glamping, because you have designated campsites. You have restroom buildings. You've got water. You don't have to filter your water. There are restaurants along the way, depending on where you are on the hike. You can have breakfast at the airport and then have lunch at Two Harbors when you get there. So it's kind of like glamping, but there's also live bison just roaming the island, which could be exciting.
Absolutely. It's interesting how your baseline changes for what is glamping and what is not glamping
Right.
after spending a few cycles on the JMT.
Yeah.
Now, Now, I've been referring to you as Doc this entire time. I
Uh-huh.
believe that's your trail name. What is a trail name and how'd you get it?
Yeah, so a trail name, I've come to understand is a unique American tradition where hikers on longer trails give each other names out there, kind of nicknames based on maybe some kind of personality quirk or something that happens on the trail to a person, or maybe where they're from. And so I got Doc. I have a doctorate. I am not a medical doctor by any means, but it's not really an exciting story. The guys just called me Doc when I was out on the trail, and it just stuck. So not too exciting, but I like the name. I like the trail name. And in
It's
fact,
a it's a
my own kids who are in their 20s and their significant others now call me Doc. It's I think that'll be my name when I'm grandpa. I'll be Grandpa Doc. So.
it's a good name and a great story, and I think that that's a kind of segues us into a little bit of a outdoor life balance, as I like to refer to it. We've been talking a lot, about kind of balancing these grand outdoor trips, and in your case, and as well as in my case too, how you kind of have to plan it around real life. So I take it that you are not a professional outdoorsman. That this is a hobby for you. What do you do? What do you do? And how? What do you do for money and to pay the bills? And how do you balance that with your outdoor ambitions?
Okay. So once upon a time, I was an English teacher. And from there, I joined the administrative ranks and was an assistant principal and a principal at different parts of my career at the same school up here in Santa Clarita. I was a site administrator for about 20 years. And now I currently work at the district office of my school district.
Interesting. Now, I find that there is perhaps educators or people in the academic profession are almost over-indexed in the outdoors. I think the lifestyle gives them perhaps a bit more flexibility, not an extreme amount, but it's a better balance, perhaps.
Yeah, I've talked to a number of people on the podcast who are from the world of education and who have exploited their time away in the summer to take on these adventures. And in fact, the first time I heard about thru hiking was from a teacher who was at our feeder junior high school where I was principal. And he told me that he was section hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. And I'm like, okay, I understood every word in that sentence, but I have no idea what you're talking about. Tell me what you're talking about. Well, I go for a hike, and I start here in the morning, and I walk and I make camp, and then I get up the next day and I keep walking and I make camp. And I said, you're out there because my only experience at that point was car camping. I said, you're out there camping, but you're walking all day and then setting up a new camp? What? How does that work? And so he kind of got me intrigued or interested, and that kind of helped when my buddy at work suggested we do the JMT. I kind of had an inkling as to what it was all about at that point.
Hopefully, he wasn't doing that over 26 years.
He's been doing it for a long time, and he's
Okay.
currently, if you ask him where he is on the trail, he's currently up in Washington. So he's getting close to finishing it.
Getting pretty close.
Yeah.
Uh, and now that's an interesting point to kind of riff on a little bit. Is that you've been mentioning these trails pretty much in a northbound way, but I've talked to a number of people that have almost been torn the decision to go northbound or southbound. I guess in your case, kind of section hiking, it's a little bit different. But did you plan? Did you look at the terrain at all before you started and said, "Hey, I want to go in one direction or the other"?
A lot of people want to do the JMT going southbound because the elevation at Happy Isles is like 4,700 feet, and you build your way up gradually. If you were to start at the southern terminus and hike northbound, you are finding yourself at 14,505 feet at the very beginning, and kind of making your way above the 10,000 foot line for the first 50% of the trail before kind of decreasing a little bit. And so you could run into problems with altitude sickness if you are not acclimated. And so the majority of people try and do the southbound hike, but they're those are kind of like the golden ticket. If you can't get a Happy Isles permit, then there are several other ways to access the trail, either going northbound or southbound. So you see people going in both directions on the JMT. Now the longer trails, The PCT, the CDT, depends on when you're going to start. If you're going to start traditionally, around March or April, then you have time to hike northbound and beat the snows before you get to Canada, or beat most of the snow. But if your time frame, your job, your outside life was not going to let you start in March or April, you have a later start date. A lot of people will start at the northern terminus and go south because they can get through that, mountainous terrain, the higher elevations, before the snow starts coming down, and they finish in the desert hiking down towards the Mexican border.
Now, you mentioned there started the JMT going northbound is at such a high elevation at Whitney, and I find that too as I get older and older, it's just more of a challenge to deal with altitude, as well as the first couple days on a trail is always an adjustment. Did you find in the beginning that it was the same way, and did you have to make some gear decisions to lighten your load?
The first day of a hike is always brutal. I don't care how much you've trained. Once you get a pack on your back and you're hiking at altitude, and if the sun is out, if it's a warm day, it sucks. It is not fun, and you're thinking to yourself, what am I doing now? This is day one. There's no way I'm going to be able to finish this. Yet, we've not quit. We've not turned around. We've not thrown in the towel. Sometimes you make a donation to the hiking gods. I'm not going to carry this another foot. But it's always that first day is the worst. And in the words of IB Tat, Jeff Oliver, never quit on a bad day. Never quit on a bad day. Push through. And if you're gonna stop on a trip, stop on your own terms.
Oh, interesting. I like that. I've also heard kind of a similar sentiment. Never drop out of a race at night. Where when morale is low, you just want to wait and get through the night, and then maybe in the light of day, or in your case, as a few days pass by, you just have a healthier observation of what's going on.
That's right.
Now. Now, you mentioned sacrificing gear to the trail gods. Did it take you a while to get your gear dialed in, or do you feel like you're in a place now where it's pretty dialed?
I'm always tinkering, and so I've had the good fortune to pick up a couple of sponsors along the way. Different sponsors have come and gone, and I've been able to pick up some gear from some different folks. So I've got different backpacks, I've got different tents, I've got tarps, I've got sleeping bags and quilts, and so I'm always kind of tinkering and mixing and matching and trying out new combinations to see what works.
Oh, that's interesting. Now, when you pick up a new sponsor, do you find that you peruse through the product catalog and really have your eye on a key piece of gear, or how does that conversation go?
Absolutely. I mean, I've typically what has happened, and the way it's worked for me, is that I have, in my quest to find guests, I'm always scouting talent, and I have stumbled across a couple of people who work either are the creators of the company or who work at a high level in the company, and I've had them on the podcast, and they've enjoyed their experience, and through that experience, able to, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So I always just put myself out there and say, hey, would you like to be affiliated with the podcast and strike up some kind of relationship here? And, sometimes it's for money and sometimes it's for gear. And so it's been a beneficial relationship. And I do find myself, once the relationship has been established, spending some time looking through the catalog, of course.
Well, I tell you what, this podcast is partly for myself. I'm taking notes here on the side, so I'll be, as I've got my list to go through.
That was a pro tip. That was a pro tip just for you, Eric.
Well, thank you. Keep them coming. Keep them coming.
All right.
I find, and as we were talking about beforehand, I spent so many years working at REI, and for much of that time, my paycheck just got recycled into the gear. So I've got a growing collection myself, but there's always room for more. All right, Doc. Now, staying on the gear, one of the sayings that I've picked up from from your podcast, and I've realized mine is slightly different. So I'd like to get your take on it. I always say that whenever you're finding gear and selecting new gear, there's kind of three aspects. It can either be light, warm, or inexpensive. Now I believe you tweak that saying a little bit to include durability, correct?
Yes, yeah. Light, durable, and expensive. And typically, the lighter it is and the more durable it is, the more expensive it is. So it's the gear triangle.
That's interesting. Maybe I'm more maybe I just run colder than you and more concerned about freezing out on the trail, and that's how I switch that around.
Well, there was one night on the edge of Thousand Island Lake in late September in the Sierras where I was under a tarp. I was really happy about being lightweight because it was a great day of hiking. And then that night I froze my butt off. I had every single piece of clothing that I brought on. I had both pairs of socks, both pairs of underwear. I had my rain pants on. I had my base layers on. I had my jacket on. And I still froze. I had to get up at like 4:30 and just start walking because I couldn't take another minute of it.
Oh wow! If you were motivated enough to get up and walk, that's a real sign that you were cold. That's also what I was going to say. I feel like a tent is warmer. Now I think the science is debatable on that one. Correct?
Well, it is. It's a thin wall of nylon or whatever the material might be of your tent. But I think, it probably does retain warmth as compared to a tarp. A tarp, you're keeping the frost off of you and any weather, but you're going to feel that cold air.
Right. And if it's breezy, it's coming right through.
That's right.
Depending on the direction you've set it. I know that there are many ways to set up.
That's right. You want to set up your tarp to block the wind. Yeah,
you've got to, now, and I believe too, you're a bit of a connoisseur of the different styles of setting up a tarp.
There is some guy with the YouTube channel named Papa Hiker, and he just has several videos on different tarp pitches, and I like lots of rabbit holes with through hiking. I went down that rabbit hole watching Papa Hiker videos for hours one Saturday, just experimenting with different tarp pitches. You pause the video on the TV inside, you run out and you kind of do the setup and it wasn't quite right. You come back in and my wife and the rest of my family just thought I was absolutely crazy.
Do you have because see, I'm only familiar with, I guess I would just refer to it as A-frame style or just the classic over the top, but do you have a preferred or an ideal setup here?
I do. I prefer the asymmetrical Holden.
Okay. That seems like a rather obscure reference right there.
It is. So right now, pause the podcast, just pause it and do a search for asymmetrical Holden, Holden, and you'll see what it looks like.
Now, I'm coming from my previous career as an analyst. I'm doing it in real time here. Is this is this a Holden Caulfield reference? I know you were formerly an English teacher.
I didn't make up the term. I didn't come up with this myself. This is commonly accepted tarp pitch lingo. So I'm not sure where the Holden comes from.
Okay. Now I'm seeing it. I would describe it as almost there's a couple different examples here, but I'm seeing I would almost call it like a bear cave or like a wrap around.
To some degree, yeah. It's the asymmetrical refers to you have one pole that is kind of towards, it's not on the very end, but it's on the grommet just inside the end. Then you've got your cords pulling the rest of the tarp in different directions to keep it nice and taut. But it really allows you to have a view of the night sky, and also if you've got some wind involved, if you set it up in the right direction, you can screen out that wind as well.
Okay. Now, are you a trekking pole kind of guy? I know that you typically on your podcast dive into a number of issues, if you will, or subjects that people would be shocked are fairly contentious within the outdoor community.
Yes, the hiking pole. POLL. That's poll as in survey, not the kind you hold in your hand. That's a regular feature on the podcast. I ask some questions to get people to decide one way or the other how they line up with the topic, and one of them is hiking poles. And believe it or not,
POLE, right?
POLE, that's correct.
Yes.
Believe it or not, there's a lot of people out there in the hiking world that really aren't fond of hiking poles. I fall on the side of using hiking poles. I think they're very useful. Not only can you use them with your tents or your tarps, but they're great to establish, additional points of contact with the ground if you're doing river crossings. If you're crossing over a log, it's good to be able to kind of balance with those. And, you're pulling yourself up hills. It's almost like having a handrail that you can help. You're using your arms to get you up as well. And it saves on the knees on the downhills. So a lot of good, positive reasons to use hiking poles.
A lot of great points there. I'm a little scared to admit that I am not a hiking pole user, but I find myself often recommending them. So they're a great tool and a great aid. I just don't practice what I preach, I guess.
One of those guys.
And now, are you in a similar camp with hiking boots versus trail runners?
Yeah, I started off with boots. I think everybody who thinks they're going to get into hiking think, automatically, well, I'm hiking, I need hiking boots. And so I followed that same mistake and was really uncomfortable on a couple of hikes. If the feet aren't happy, it's no fun being out there. And so, before I did the 2017 hike of the southern half of the JMT with my son, like a week before, I said, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this with boots. And I went out and got some Cascadias, Brooks Cascadias. Just happened to be at REI and was looking and found the Brooks Cascadias. They seemed to be a made for the purpose, and didn't think about my feet once during those 125 miles. So it was a game changer.
Well, we're in lockstep in that one. The Brooks Cascadia happened to be my preferred shoe when hiking as well. So there you go. We share that in common. Yeah, I like that you call that out. It's a bit of a bit of a myth, or a bit of that you have to have a hiking boot. And I guess I would add to that it's a shoe that you rarely wear, and so you never have the chance to break it in. And so you get out, as you've kind of flagged, on these first couple of days with weight on your back in the Sierra sun, and it can be a pretty rough experience. Hopefully you bring enough moleskin.
That's right. I talked to some poor guy who used boots on the AT, and they did not fit quite right, whatever the reason might be, but he was in pain and he was scared to look at his feet. So he just kept them on. He never took them off until he got to some town, and he decided to take off his boots and see how bad the problem was, and tore off like, I don't know how many layers of skin. It just kind of sloughed off as he took off his boot, and he had to wrap that up with duct tape to keep on going. It was just a brutal story. I can't imagine that he remembers that journey with any type of fondness.
I think you are really making the case for trail runners here. is what I'm hearing. Absolutely. Now, you've talked a little bit, as you kind of mentioned, your various trips. Some succeed, and some are, for lack of a better word, I'm hesitant to say failure, but you didn't complete the original intended objective. How do you personally deal with that on the trail, and what's your group dynamic like when you have to make the call to turn around or to alter your plans?
Yeah, I think when we look at each other, and all of us have big, wide eyeballs and are saying, are we having fun? Are we enjoying this? Is this what we expected? Is this as painful as we thought it was going to be? I think that's when the conversation gets going. Again, you never want to stop on a bad day, but there were a couple of trips where, like that one I told you about, we were trying to do the northern half and just ran into days in the forecast of just nothing but rain and thunder. Where we decided to pack it in. We were near Mammoth Lakes at that point, and decided that was a good jump out point. We also wanted to test the gear out on top of San Gorgonio. We're going to do an overnight there, And same kind of thing. We were setting up our tents, and snows were coming down, and thought, I mean, we stuck it out for a couple of hours in the tents, and just got colder and colder and colder, and said, let's bug out. And so, I think, you never want to call it a failure. It's an experience, and you want to learn from that experience. But you also, if you're not one of these guys who's doing 2,600 miles, you also want to be around to be able to experience the next big trip. And so I don't think there's a problem with knowing what you're facing and deciding whether or not that you're up for that.
It's also interesting too to hear you talk about it. It sounds like the weather plays a pretty big role. That it's just hard to make it through really tough weather in the outdoors.
Yeah, it was funny because when we made the decision near Gladys Lake on the JMT, that we checked the out days for the weather on the Garmin device, and it was just more of the same. We decided, okay, we're going to turn around. So we went back down to Red's Meadow, and as we were going back down, we ran into I think she was from France, a young woman from France who was hiking northbound. And we tried to tell her, hey, it's nothing but bad weather for the next few days. And she kind of looked down her nose at us and said, you are JMT hikers. I am a PCT hiker. I don't care. Weather doesn't matter to me. I'm in it for the long haul. And so, it also, that kind of factors in as well, I guess.
Well, I guess so. Everybody's got to make their own decision,
Yeah.
And go down that route. That's funny. I was it kind of, and I absolutely agree with your decision. And I find that do you find that as you get more experience and perhaps go after bigger objectives or more remote objectives, or however you'd like to define it here, that your and again, I don't want to say failure rate, but I'm still searching for a better word, increases over time?
I think your tolerance level increases. And so we were on the southern half of the JMT a couple of summers ago and ran into a thunderstorm for the first day and a half, and didn't even think about turning around. We just kept going. I mean, I think you build up that tolerance and what to expect. And if you're in the Sierras, even if the day starts out sunny, that doesn't mean it's going to be sunny all day. I mean, these storms kick up in no time. And they blow through, and always expect to get a little bit wet. And so I think the more you do it, the more your tolerance. When I talked to that French woman, coming the opposite direction, she'd been hiking since Mexico, right? So she's got 700 miles under her belt, all kinds of experience. So I'm sure her tolerance level was very high.
Right. I was, it reminds me of, I was running a marathon one time, and this guy had the sign. It was my favorite sign I've ever seen at a marathon. It was deep in, mile 22, 23, and everybody was kind of, you're starting to feel it, hitting the wall or just past the wall, if you will, or in my case, deep in the wall. And the sign said, if you don't mind, it doesn't matter.
Nice. My favorite sign on the marathon trail was this guy holding up a sign. He wasn't running, but he was holding up a sign saying, "This is the worst parade ever."
I think it's important to have that dry or dark humor when you're
Absolutely.
out doing these huge adventures.
Absolutely.
Now, on the mindset of that, and perhaps the mentality, do you find that you get a lot of energy from the people, the friends that you hike with? And how has your mentality changed over time? It sounds like you've built up quite a resilience in the outdoors to be able to walk through a rainstorm and not mind it.
Yeah, group dynamics are interesting because you think that for people who have not done a lot of hiking, they hear about guys going out or people going out and doing a hike together, multiple day hike. You don't all hike at the same speed. And so we have over the years kind of grown accustomed to having these spaces open up between us as we hike. We could be, 10 yards behind the person in front of us, or we could be a half mile back. But we know that we're going to eat lunch at the same place. We're going to take breaks at the same place. We're going to camp at the same place. And so a lot of the time you're hiking with your buddies, but you're on your own, you're alone in your head, you're thinking about stuff. And sometimes I realized several times that I don't know the complete words to any one song except for Happy Birthday. I know all of those words, but any other song from my youth or even my adulthood, I couldn't sing every word of a single song, which is kind of embarrassing.
Now, I mean, it sounds like you're not going to be a professional vocalist or singer, so I think you're safe on that front.
Yeah.
Now, do you find that you enjoy the both the solitude and the kind of group dynamic? Is that something that you find appealing?
Yes, and in fact, there were times where we tried to hike closer together and talk to each other along the way, which is good in spurts. But if you try and do it the whole time, you're going to annoy each other. And so sometimes it's better just to be out there. And I think it's also very cool to experience the middle of nowhere by yourself to some degree. I think that is healthy, that is exciting, exhilarating. So that's a good thing.
It's, and I think it's really interesting to hear you say that. Even though you're the host of a podcast with over 200 episodes, but you really enjoy the solitude and being alone. I find that when I go out in the wilderness, specifically the hardest grouping is it when it's just you and a buddy, because then the dynamic is there's a little bit of pressure for you guys to always be on, always be interacting. Do you find you prefer a little bit larger groups as a result of that?
I've done just me and my son out there before. I've done groups as big as 6. And even if you're in a group as big as 6, I think there's also kind of a natural separation into like 3 pairs sometimes. And so, again, another good reason not to hike so close to each other is if you're not the first guy, all you're doing is looking at the calves of the guy in front of you. And, there's much better views out there than that. And if you're the second guy and you want to take a break and you're just like 15 feet behind the guy in front of you, and the guy in front of you doesn't want to take a break, I mean, you feel I don't know, inadequate saying, "Hey, can we take a break? I'm tired." Well, the other guy is just ready to keep charging ahead. If you got that half-mile distance between you or a few hundred yards between you, you can break as many times as you want and feel just fine about it.
I hear you on that. And I would just add that it's especially true on the uphills, is that everybody really is at a different pace and you kind of got to be alone in your head.
Absolutely.
Some of these challenging peaks. I also like that call out, excuse me, that the view when you're behind your friends is often the calves. I know as you're well aware, right? There's all these amazing YouTube videos of the JMT now that they show the trip in all its glory, but often they're relatively, your view is you're hiking with blinders on, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, Chopper's got a great set of calves, but it doesn't mean that's all I want to see. So I either have to, occasionally lead or just fall back and not worry about keeping up with him.
Wise words right there. Now, I wanted to make sure we had a chance to talk about your podcast.
Okay.
What was the sort of the motivation and the vision for starting it?
Yeah, a little interesting story. My son and a couple of his buddies, they started a podcast doing a kind of like their take on sports, and they were recording in the garage. And I'd listen in a couple times, and they thought they were doing a great job. I would listen to their podcast, and it sounded like one of them was in the closet somewhere, chiming in. I'm like, you got to get Wesley out of the closet. Let him get him closer to a microphone so he can, this is your product. They can only hear your voice. Make sure it's good. And so I was, both you and I live in Southern California. I was on a work day. I had to go down to Downey, and I'm stuck in LA traffic, and I'm thinking about the trail, and I'm thinking, God, how do I stay connected? I'm months away from my next big hike. How do I stay connected to the outdoors? How do I stay connected to the trail? And the fact that my son and his buddies were doing a podcast, and the just being stuck in traffic, it just kind of, light bulb went off. do a podcast about hiking, about outdoor adventure. And so that's kind of how it all came together.
I gotcha. All the aspects kind of clicked together, and you got there.
Mm-hmm.
That's really cool. And it's clear from listening to the episodes that you have just an immense passion for the outdoors, and it gives you the opportunity to right connect with, not only stay connected to the outdoors, but connect with all these amazing people. Now, on that note, in the beginning, did you find you had trouble getting the guests you wanted on, or, and I guess I should ask at this point, are you getting all the guests that you want on the podcast?
Yeah, I think we said this off air leading up to our talk tonight, where if I have any listeners who are currently listening who have been with me since the beginning, I want to thank them. They have really survived the full gamut of the John Freakin Muir Pod, because when it started out, I didn't know what it was. That I was just a guy with a microphone and a computer and trying to figure some stuff out. So I had all kinds of different formats going, different guests. Is this about me and my buddies talking about hiking? Was this about me talking to somebody I didn't know and their experiences? Was this me telling a story? I've had episodes that do all of those things individually. But it took me a while to kind of settle in as to what kind of a podcast I wanted to have. And so it's turned into really an interview podcast where I will look for people in the news or on social media and reach out to them and ask them if they want to come in and share their experiences with our listeners. And it's really allowed me to talk to a wide variety of people from different walks of life from all over the world, which is just the coolest thing. I think maybe I said it earlier. I don't know if I already said this or not, if we said this before we started recording, but you don't make a lot of money doing this. The reward comes from making these connections with people and letting them tell their stories.
Absolutely. And we're very much kindred spirits. It sounds like I'm on multiple fronts, but it's just always amazing. I used to love meeting people on the trail. And so to be able to bring that and engage with more people from a wider audience is great. Now, your format, as I'm just developing, and you can kind of see that this is perhaps a looser style. I noticed that you have quite a bit of structure built into your podcast. Is that by design?
It is. It is. I am a guy who craves structure. I like to be organized. It's actually a downfall on the trail. You can plan to the nth degree about where you're going to camp and what you're going to bring and what it's going to look like, and you have all these expectations. And then you get out there on the trail and it kind of punches you in the mouth, and you've got to be flexible and readjust. But when I'm doing stuff, especially when I'm speaking, I like to have notes. I like to sound like I know what I'm talking about. I want to try and sound polished. And so I over prepare. It's kind of how I compensate for, whatever fear I have about, public speaking or talking in front of people. And so I try and script it out as much as possible. And I think I'm getting better at, I don't script out the discussion points as much when we're talking to the guest about, where they've been, what they've done. I'll have, what trails they've done, but, I'll let them tell the story, and I will kind of counterpunch with questions, follow-up questions, to kind of zero in on some of the details and elicit some funny stories. So, but the structure, it really helps put me at ease for the interviews.
I can understand that. Just coming into it with a little bit prepared definitely gives you the confidence to move forward. It's interesting, though, that you cite craving that structure in the comparison of the outdoor landscape, if you will. I find that, and I feel like I'm doing a lot of quotes tonight, but I really like them. Myself, so I find that I always say you do what you can when you can, and the rest of the time you just brace for impact. Now the outdoors is a unpredictable landscape. When things turn south, do you find that you're comfortable rolling with the punches, or?
So I like to think of the outdoors it is structured. I mean, what you're doing out there is pretty structured. It's very simple. It's, city life is very complicated. We've got appointments, we've got phones, we've got all kinds of things going on in our lives. But out on the trail, it's a very simple structure. You are you're waking up in the morning, you're packing everything up, you're eating breakfast, you are marching, 10, 15, 20 miles to the next campsite, you're setting up camp, and you're doing it all over again. You just keep doing that day after day. And so that I think there's great simplicity, and there's also great structure to that. I mean, there's a very single-mindedness of purpose, very singular purpose, which is enjoyable. I love that. I love that all the complexities fall away, and you're just out there with nature doing very simple things. Now, I'm not saying it's easy. It is simple, but it is hard. You're doing hard things out there, and I think when things get really hard, that's when you kind of embrace the singularity of purpose there, that you are, being uncomfortable, leaning into being uncomfortable, and knowing that, okay, I just have to get to this point, and I'm gonna set up camp, and we'll do this all over again tomorrow. And if you do that enough times, you can go from Mexico to Canada.
Wow, I really like that viewpoint of it. I've often always thought of the outdoors as a little bit more wild, and I think I've just tried to think back to one of my more recent trips was we went for my buddy and I. We went for, it's a rock climb, the Face of Whitney, and we showed up just because we didn't have we couldn't pick and choose the time of year as is often the case, and we had to go in early May. And as a result, the snow levels were way lower than we had anticipated. And so as a result, the timeline, the timetable that we all had just had to all get reset and jumbled around. But it's interesting to hear your perspective on how the simplicity of waking up every morning, hiking to a destination, and if you do that enough times, you get all the way to Canada from Mexico.
Right.
Now, I'm curious, talking about your guests a little bit. Is there a guest that, or are you, let me know if you're not comfortable saying this, but I'm wondering if there's a guest that has surprised you the most.
Yeah, in preparing for this, I jotted down a few guests that have provided some surprises. So I hope you don't mind. I have multiple answers to that.
Please.
So the biggest surprise I think I had in an interview was when I asked someone about his childhood. Jack Jones, also known as Quadzilla, Triple Crowner, now a calendar year Triple Crowner. He did the calendar year Triple Crown this past year, where he hiked all 3 long American trails in 1 calendar year. But I asked him about his childhood, thinking that I'd get the standard answer that he grew up such and such a place, and they did some camping, and he enjoyed it. But he told me he was actually born in China. And it was during the whole Tiananmen Square. It's not a revolution, but the social unrest and the protests. And his dad was very outspoken during that time, and he was just a little kid. He was like 5, 6, 7 years old, and his dad was imprisoned. And the family, to look out for his best interest, Jack's best interest, actually sent him to America by himself, where he ended up being adopted by a woman in the South. And so, wow. I mean, I was just blown away by that story, that he was, sent on his own as a little kid to a strange country, and was adopted by somebody else, and grew up in America and became this incredible endurance athlete. So that was just a very powerful story.
That's incredible. Yeah, that it must have been, I mean, an enormous cultural adjustment, as well as right, just being separated from your family. Wow, I'm excited. I'm excited now that you flagged it to go back and listen to that episode.
Yeah. Some other people that have really surprised me: Jeff Garmire, aka Legend, an incredible endurance athlete. Just what he is able to endure and accomplish out there. He just set the FKT for the JMT, did it in 72 hours and 47 minutes, which is basically, you're doing 70-mile days. That's just unbelievable. And he is hilarious. He is so funny to talk to. And his side job for a while, he was a substitute teacher. And that is mind-boggling to me. I'm like, do those kids, do they even know what they have in front of them? I mean, this guy is a character with all kinds of stories he can tell. To have him as a substitute teacher, that's a big win for that student.
That's fantastic. And then there we go again. It's that academic background that enables you to go do these
Right.
amazing things in the outdoors.
Yeah. Another guy, Jason Hardrath, was an Ironman athlete, and he was training to do the Ironman in Hawaii. One of the biggest, hardest races. With a 2-mile swim, was it a 112-mile bike ride, and you finish up with a marathon. Doing incredible things like that. And then he was involved. He's an educator too. He's a PE teacher. He actually was on his way to a board meeting, lost control of his car, and was ejected from his car, and tore up his knee. So he couldn't compete as an Ironman anymore. He pivoted to become a peak bagger, and he was the fastest man to set 100 FKTs. So FKTs are fastest known times. So just incredible how life throws you a big curveball and you're able to pivot and make something out of it. Incredible story.
Now, you've chosen 3 athletes, 3 adventurers that have achieved monumentous milestones in the outdoors. Do you find week in and week out talking to them that they inspire you to do bigger and grander adventures?
They do. They make me see what people are capable of, what I myself might be capable of. Maybe not to that degree, but just getting out and doing stuff and challenging myself and pushing myself. I've also talked to people who have done far less than this, and yet their stories are just as rich and interesting and surprising.
That's definitely my takeaway so far. And, from only doing this for 16 episodes is just the vibrancy that all these guests have to offer is truly amazing. Now, given that we're 2 podcasters here, I would be remiss if I didn't ask, who would you most like to get on your podcast?
I thought I had Joe McConaughey, also known as String Bean, lined up for an episode. He's a long distance hiker. Seems like a really colorful character. And we had some initial connections. I even put together an outline for him, and I thought we were ready to record, and he kind of just, I don't know if he got caught up in other stuff, but we haven't been able to reconnect. I also, if you've listened to the podcast, you know that I'm a little bit fascinated, a little bit obsessed with the Barkley Marathons. And so I would love to have Gary Cantrell, a.k.a. Lazarus Lake, the creator of the Barkley Marathons, on the podcast. I think that'd be a lot of fun. And also, have you seen the 2 documentaries, the two main documentaries on the Barkley Marathons?
I've seen one, and I like you. The race is fascinating. For those who don't know, what is this marathon?
Okay, so marathon, put that in air quotes, because what it is a loop in a national park in Tennessee, set up by Gary Cantrell, Lazarus Lake. It is the most bizarre race, most unique, infuriating race that you'll ever come across. The loop is said to be, 20 miles long. It ranges, I think, anywhere from 20 to like 26 miles long. And to be a finisher in the Barkley Marathons, you have to do that loop 5 times. And so there's a time limit. It's 60 hours. You have to do 5 loops in 60 hours. In the 30 plus years that the race has been in existence, there's been, I think, 15 finishers. And so this race takes endurance athletes, the top athletes on the planet, and chews them up and spits them out. I've talked to a number of folks that have attempted the Barkley, people like Mike Wardian, people like Jeff Garmeyer, and they did not finish. It's an insane race that is an endurance event that has you hiking and wayfinding, daytime, nighttime, going counterclockwise on the loop, clockwise on the loop. They don't tell you when it's going to start. You have like a 12-hour window when it's going to start. And then when they blow the horn, that means that's a 1-hour warning. And the race starts when Gary Cantrell lights a cigarette at the yellow gate. And then you're off.
The lighting of the cigarette it's got to be one of the most unique ways to start a race. The documentary that I watched, it was heartbreaking, and you are going to know this more than me, but the guy, he didn't finish because of a navigation error, in which when you're going that many hours and you're so exhausted, I mean, it's so easy to make a mistake, and it's just he missed it by it couldn't have been more than a few minutes, or yeah.
Yeah, that the name of that documentary is Where Dreams Go to Die. And it was a story of Gary Robbins and his 2 attempts to do the Barkley. And you're right, just mere minutes. And strange things happen when you are sleep deprived.
Right.
Yeah, the other main documentary about the Barkley is called The Race That Eats Its Young. So those 2 titles of those documentaries kind of give you some insight into what the Barkley is all about.
Well, right. The titles itself gives you an impression
Right.
to what's going on here. Okay. Well, it's good to know that there are some future projects out there, some future goals. Now, do you also have future trips, future outdoor trips that you're excited to do?
Yeah, Chopper has set up a piece of the Tahoe Rim Trail, the part that goes through the Desolation Wilderness. So looking forward to doing that, and eventually doing the whole Tahoe Rim Trail. We've talked about doing the Lost Coast Trail in Northern California, kind of where the Pacific Coast Highway, they tried to hug the coast, and then it became this part just became inaccessible, too rough. Parts kept failing, and so they just kind of left it there. And so it's a nice stretch of coast where you're through hiking on the coast. You have to know the tidal patterns in order to cross some parts of this trail. And I don't know, I like the mountains, but the more I've heard about the desert from some of my guests, I would, don't tell Mrs. Doc this. I'm gonna have to whisper this in case she's too close. But I would like to eventually try and give maybe the Arizona Trail a try.
Interesting.
Yeah.
To echo that point, I've found that the guests who are moving southbound tend to enjoy the desert in general. Southbound on the PCT tend to enjoy the desert a lot more. A lot of them have said perhaps it's because they're so dialed in at that point that they can really enjoy this unique landscape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Well, so who knows? It's good to hear that you've got some trips as well as podcasts, kind of in the sights for the future. I think we've circled back. It's that time. Now, have you thought through your pro tip insight of the week for this podcast?
I've committed the cardinal sin that all of my guests, I give them the warning up front as well, and then we get to it and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I don't even know what to say." I don't want to be cliche and say hike your own hike, and don't let the expectations of other dictate what you do out there. Trail runners, we've talked about embracing the suck, kind of leaning into being uncomfortable. The part about over planning, I think part of the pleasure for me about through hiking is planning, taking a look at the maps, kind of identifying where you're going to camp, how far you're going to go, anticipating what it's going to be like, and then you get out there and it's different. After the first day, you're already off your schedule, and so I think maybe the pro tip is being flexible out there, being able to roll with the punches. Don't get too high, don't get too low. Enjoy the moment, and soak it all up.
That's a great way to sum it up. Just be out there and enjoy it, and just know that it doesn't always go your way. So you gotta roll with it.
Uh-huh.
Now, and I believe you end on this, so I thought I'd end close to that too. What have I not asked you that you're dying to talk about?
I had a really fun time in January talking to the 4 guys who did the calendar year Triple Crown in 2022. I think it was the largest class ever to complete the calendar Triple Crown. I think there's close to 20 people now that have done that. It's basically hiking about 7,800 miles in one calendar year. Some of the guys started in January and didn't finish till November. One of the guys started on the Appalachian Trail in April and decided that he wanted to do all 3 trails. His name was Boomerang, he was from Germany. Really impressive that he was able to get all 3 trails finished in just 7 months. But that episode was called Trail Savants because each one of them, they didn't hike together. They didn't do it together. They all took a different approach and started at different times of the year. And they kept track of each other on the trail, via social media. They knew each other, that they were out there. But being able to get all 4 of them on the same episode and have them talk about their approach and their experiences out there and share some stories from the trail, that was a lot of fun. And it was co-hosted. I was able to wrangle up as a co-host for that episode, Jeff Garmeyer, who is a character. He's been on the podcast 4 or 5 times, and he is just hilarious. So he was kind of like the color commentator to my play-by-play guy.
That sounds like an amazing podcast. I'm excited to go back and watch it, just to have, I think, all those different perspectives must have been a lot of fun.
Yeah, and just to give you some insight into the flavor of their characters, I'll tell you their trail names. So we had Legend as the co-host, and we had Boomerang, as I mentioned. We had the Professor, we had Quadzilla, and Kansas Express. So some colorful characters.
Sounds like they run the spectrum in terms of perhaps approaches and personality.
Exactly.
Probably some well-deserved trail names. Doc, I wanted to thank you for coming on the podcast. I've really enjoyed it. I've personally learned quite a bit as we're 2 brothers in arms in this podcasting world. But I thank you for coming on, and I hope to see you out on the trail.
Same here, Eric. I really enjoyed it. And you know what? We're going to have to turn the tables on you and have you come on as a guest on the podcast, and you can share some of your stories.
Well, I can't wait.